Guys, welcome back. This will just be a quick little video here. It's good to be back in the garage. Last time you guys were with me, you helped me square up the suspension, the front and rear axles on my Model A here. And we got kind of scientific about some measuring and adjusting and setting my four-link. Also setting my bars up on the front. But now I'm confident the car is square, ready to go down the road almost. The last thing I need to do is set my pinion angle. And that has to do with adjusting my top bars. But before I do that, I'm going to dive into a little bit of theory about how a drive shaft should be set up in a rig like this, and then we'll go do a little bit of measuring. So I'm going to put you up on the tripod, follow with me, but before I forget, follow through to the end of this video, because at the end I'm going to throw a link up to another video on YouTube that really explains this really good, like some guy that's really nerdy about science and stuff figured it out and has a great example. But I'm going to show you in my terms. Follow along. Okay guys, thanks for following along here. Bear with me as I work on my little workbench here with the drive shaft that is about 1 inch too long to use in this car. But it's going to serve as a good example. What we're talking about today on setting up the drive shaft is setting up the appropriate angle with my drive shaft coming out of my transmission and going into the pinion on the rear end. So, here's what we're shooting for. Here's the theory behind it. You can imagine these two discs here as being the plane in which these two rotate in. The bottom line on all this theory and math and rotational business is that these two planes that the drive shaft is rotating in, front and rear, want to be parallel. Okay? They want to be parallel planes together. What I mean by that is, regardless of how the suspension is on your vehicle, whether your transmission's high and your rear axle's low, you want them to be parallel. What you don't want is one of them to be out of sync with the other, and that has to do with when these are rotating. You can see this one rotating in an ellipse actually has to move at a different speed at different parts of it, and that's where you get vibrations in a vehicle, is when you have one end operating at a different speed than the other end in its rotational plane. Ooh. Don't quote me on that one scientifically, but you get my point. So here's what I'm shooting for on my car. I want the back of my transmission, which I can't really help. I could put a shim behind the transmission to change, but the crankshaft, the transmission, they're all in one straight line that comes out, and it's going to come out at a certain angle in the car, okay? And we can't do much about that. It's tipped down a little bit. So what I need to do is at the rear of the car, when I can adjust my pinion angle at the rear of the car, let me make sure this is pointed the right way so you get the visual in a second when we move over to the car. Transmission pointed down slightly. Pinion angle in the rear also has to be parallel, so it's got to be tipped up slightly. Okay? Now what I'm shooting for is them to be exactly parallel. This is a hot rod, like street rod type, not high performance race car. In a race car, you might want that rear axle tipped. The magic number is about 2.5 degrees down, so that under hard acceleration it brings it in plane with the rest of the drive shaft, with the front of the drive shaft. Forget about that for this one though. We're working about my street rod, hot rod, rat rod, what is it? I don't know. Back to the transmission, pinion angle, want to be equal. Okay, so let's go do some measuring on the car and set this up. Okay, first let's talk some tools of the trade. There's lots of different ways to measure the angle. This one probably being the most common. Cheap, buy them at Harbor Freight, order them online. They're pretty good. However, if you look at this one, if you do it certain ways, it gets kind of jumpy, it bounces around, it's a little bit hard to read. Magnetic base is not magnetic. I don't know where the magnet went. It's good, and that works pretty well. It's hard to get, with that shaking around though, it's hard to get down there and get a good accurate reading on the drive line, on the transmission. This little guy, also from Harbor Freight, much better. Digital readout, kicks butt. Take the batteries out of it if you're going to let it sit for a few months because the batteries die. And then you go to make a video using it, worthless. So, going with the third option, the old smartphone. Download an app, angle finder, piece of cake. Let's go try it out. Okay, here's the car we're working on. It's hard to get down there right on the back face of the transmission with that cross member in there and actually see the iPhone. So we're just going to come up here and do it on the back of the head, which is perpendicular to that. perpendicular to the crankshaft center shaft of the transmission, which is parallel with that back face, and give us a little better face to measure off of. So if I come in here and one-handed appropriately, stick this thing on the back of the head, here's what I come up with on my engine tilt. It says it is, let's let it settle, we'll call it negative 3.6. Okay, so if we walk down here, we want to parallel back here on the back of the engine, so let everything stabilize. Look at that, I've got negative 3.6. Okay, so what I'm getting at here, the back of the engine, the back of the transmission, if you remember our two circles, sits at a negative 3.6, which is also what I want the rear axle face to sit at, and it does, negative 3.6. So if I just tie everything in and button it in the way it is, this driveline will be in perfect harmony, as in both my U-joints are in parallel planes. And that, I think, is how you're supposed to set it up. Don't like it? Give me a comment. Again, check out this link I'm going to hang on here of the source video. It explains it a lot better, but I do appreciate you checking out the channel. Thanks.